Some coincidences change everything. Flight 447 to Boston was boarding its final passengers when Garrett Sullivan made his way down the narrow aisle, carry-on bumping against seats, muttering apologies to irritated travelers already settled in. He was 34, wearing a wrinkled white button-down shirt he'd ironed at 5 that morning, dark circles under his eyes from another sleepless night worrying about his daughter's medical bills. His seat was 27B, middle row economy, the last seat available when he'd booked this morning. He found his row and stopped. Sitting in 27A by the window was a woman in a red dress that seemed far too elegant for Coach. Dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, expensive earrings catching the cabin light. She was staring out the window with an expression Garrett recognized because he'd worn it himself many times. The look of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. "Excuse me," Garrett said quietly. "I'm in the middle seat." The woman looked up, and Garrett's breath caught. It was Valentina Rossi. Even someone like Garrett, who rarely read society pages or business news, knew that face. Billionaire heiress, daughter of real estate mogul Antonio Rossi, engaged to tech entrepreneur Marcus Thorne in what the media called the wedding of the decade. The wedding that had been scheduled for yesterday. Valentina's eyes met his, and he saw recognition there too, though not of him personally. Recognition of the moment when someone realizes they've been identified. "Please don't," she said softly. "Please just sit down and don't say anything." Garrett slid into his seat. "I wasn't going to." They sat in silence as the plane filled, as flight attendants went through safety demonstrations, as engines roared to life and the aircraft lifted into gray skies. 20 minutes into the flight, Valentina spoke without looking at him. "You're wondering why I'm in economy. I'm wondering why you look like you'd rather be anywhere else," Garrett replied. "Honestly." She turned to him then, really looked at him, saw a man with kind eyes and work-worn hands, someone who wasn't impressed by her name or her dress or the scandal she represented. "I ran from my wedding," she said, 2 hours before the ceremony, walked out in this dress, took a taxi to the airport, bought a ticket on the first flight leaving. The only seat left was this one. "Good dress for running," Garrett observed. Valentina laughed, a real laugh that surprised them both. "It cost $18,000. My mother had it imported from Milan. My daughter's surgery cost $42,000, Garrett said. "I'm flying to Boston to meet with a specialist about a second opinion we can't afford." Something shifted in the air between them. Two strangers, two different worlds, both running toward or away from something that terrified them. "Your daughter," Valentina said. "What's wrong?" Garrett found himself telling her. About 7-year-old Sophie, who'd been diagnosed with a rare heart condition. About his wife who'd left when the medical bills started piling up. About working double shifts at the construction site and still falling behind. About this last desperate hope that a specialist in Boston might have answers the doctors at home didn't. Valentina listened with an intensity that made him feel truly heard for the first time in months. "Why did you run?" Garrett asked when he'd finished. Valentina looked down at her hands, at the engagement ring she hadn't taken off yet. "Because Marcus doesn't love me. He loves my father's company, my family's connections, the image we project. And I realized that if I married him, I'd spend the rest of my life being an asset instead of a person." She twisted the ring on her finger. "My father has been grooming me my whole life to marry well, to strengthen the business, to be useful. But yesterday morning, I looked in the mirror in that $18,000 dress, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. So you ran," Garrett said, echoing what she'd told him. "So I ran. To Boston, because I have a cousin there who always said I could visit. Because it was far enough away that maybe I could think clearly." The flight attendant came by with drinks. Garrett ordered coffee he didn't really want. Valentina asked for water. "Can I ask you something?" Valentina said after the attendant had moved on. "Do you think I'm selfish? Walking away from a man who wanted to marry me? From a life most people would dream of having?" Garrett considered the question seriously. "My wife walked away when things got hard. Left me and Sophie when the medical bills started coming in. I was angry about that for a long time. He paused. But walking away from something that's hurting you isn't the same as abandoning someone who needs you. You're not being selfish. You're being brave. Valentina's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. They talked for the rest of the flight. About Sophie's love of drawing. About Valentina's abandoned dream of being an architect. About the weight of expectations and the courage it takes to disappoint people in order to save yourself. When the plane landed in Boston, they stood together in the aisle, two people who had shared something honest in the anonymous space of flight. "I hope your daughter gets the help she needs," Valentina said. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Garrett replied. They should have parted ways there, gone to their separate lives, separate worlds, remained a strange and meaningful moment in each other's stories. But Valentina did something impulsive. "What's the name of the specialist you're seeing?" "Dr. Patricia Holbrook at Massachusetts General." Valentina pulled out her phone, made a call right there in the airport terminal. Garrett listened, confused, as she spoke with calm authority to someone on the other end. "Dr. Holbrook? This is Valentina Rossi. I'm calling about a patient you're consulting with today, Sophie Sullivan." Pause. "Yes, that's right. I'd like to establish a medical fund to cover all costs associated with her treatment, including the surgery and follow-up care." Garrett's mind went blank. "What are you doing?" Valentina held up a finger, still listening. "Excellent. Please send all billing to my personal accountant. I'll email you the details within the hour." She ended the call and looked at Garrett. "I'm doing something useful with money that was supposed to pay for a wedding I didn't want." "I can't accept that," Garrett said, even as hope and relief warred in his chest. "That's too much. You shared 3 hours of honest conversation with a stranger when you had every reason to recognize me and make this flight miserable," Valentina said. "You reminded me why I ran. You gave me permission to believe I wasn't being selfish." She smiled. "Let me do this, not because you need saving, but because your daughter deserves a chance and I have resources I'd rather use for something that matters." Garrett's throat closed up. He managed to nod. "Thank you," he whispered. They exchanged phone numbers, promised to stay in touch, though both wondered if they actually would. Sophie's surgery happened 3 weeks later. It was successful, miraculous even. Dr. Holbrook called her a fighter, said she'd live a normal, healthy life. Garrett sent Valentina a photo of Sophie smiling in her hospital bed, giving a thumbs up. She responded immediately, "She has your eyes." They texted sporadically over the following months. Valentina had moved to Seattle, started working at an architecture firm under an assumed name, building the life she'd always wanted. Marcus had moved on quickly, was already engaged to someone else. Garrett focused on Sophie's recovery, on being present for every milestone, every ordinary moment he'd almost lost. 6 months after that flight, Valentina flew back to Boston for a project meeting. She called Garrett on impulse. They met for coffee in a small shop near his apartment. Sophie came too, shy at first, then chattering about her drawings and her new school and her dad's terrible cooking. Valentina and Garrett talked like old friends, like people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable, and found something trustworthy there. "I'm glad you called," Garrett said as they walked back to his apartment. "I'm glad you took the last seat on that plane," Valentina replied. Whatever they were building, it was slow and careful and real. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue. Just two people who had met in a moment of crisis and found in each other something rare, genuine connection. Sometimes the most important encounters happen in the most ordinary spaces. A middle seat on a crowded flight. A conversation between strangers who had nothing to lose by being honest. Sometimes the person sitting next to you is running from the same things you are, expectations, disappointment, the weight of other people's dreams. And sometimes, just sometimes, two people from completely different worlds find common ground 30,000 feet above the earth and build something beautiful from that unlikely beginning. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment about an unexpected encounter that changed your life, a stranger who became important, a moment of honesty that mattered. Sometimes the connections we least expect become the ones we most need.